All right, and we are back, recording again. So now we're going to look at kind of the self-defense aspect of 19th century boxing. I'm only going to really comment about, what is documented in the sources. I'm not necessarily going to make any claims about how effective this would be in a modern setting. It might be very effective, it might be completely ineffective, but it is what is documented in the sources. So let's have a look. And if at any point you've got a particular scenario you want me to cover or ask about a particular thing, just let me know in the chat, and I will either try and reference some kind of 19th century source that tells you how to defeat that particular scenario, or I will try and work out how that might be done using late or 19th century unarmed martial arts, late 19th century, early 20th century. Right. So the first thing you see, which goes back a long way, is defending against the haymaker. So this kind of big swing, very instinctive motion, it's often coupled with the grab and smack. It's been documented in sources for a very, very long time. There's actually medieval wrestling manuals that tell you how to deal with people grabbing and trying to hit you. Although weirdly enough, very, very rarely, well, actually this makes perfect sense. You think about there's very little unarmed striking in medieval manuals. They sort of, their attitude seems to vary between, well, if you're going to strike someone, you might as well just do it with a weapon. And I guess the other variant as well is if you've got a very sophisticated wrestling system, but it's very, very hard for a sophisticated striking system to develop, because anyone who does rudimentary striking is just going to get taken to the ground by a wrestler. And anyone who does rudimentary striking and wants to learn how to defend themselves against a wrestler ends up doing wrestling anyway. Incidentally, the way boxing did develop is it started out as a sport, and it was a sport for many decades before people were like, hang on, you could use this to defend yourself as well. All right, so you got someone, they come at you with a big swing haymaker, maybe on a step through, maybe just a big swing, whatever. But what period sources say to do is you just switch your weight, you rotate your weight all the way back to the back foot, you lean back, keep your chin tucked. You don't want to start looking up like this, because if you do wear one, you're going down. Whereas doing this, it's going to hurt, but you might be able to recover enough to still get away. So you lean back, chin down, chin tucked, eyes forward, and then you come back with a very heavily loaded punch. So I'm a big fan of the cross for this one. So all the way back and all the way forward, and that deals with the haymaker. Haymaker comes in, you slip it, and you can see how much extra distance I'm getting. I wait for it to go sailing by, at about the point where I see it right in front of me is the point where I come straight back and hit my opponent. So again, slip and back, slip and back. Interesting enough, this is one of the areas where slipping is kind of primary defense. You can also rotate your hand down. If you ever watched like Floyd Mayweather, he's very big on doing this sort of, basically a pull counter. So this is the pull counter using it from a different guard with different foot positions. So it's a bit weird. But back and in, back and in, back and in, back and in, and once more for luck, back and in. All right, so that's sort of the defense against, your defense against someone trying to throw a big haymaker. Is you just slip back, and come in and then hit them with a counter blow. And with any luck, the fact that you're throwing a big power shot that you've got, with your power hand, and you've got this big lean as well, like even this motion of just firing yourself forward. When I do it, I like to have a little bit of a jump in the back foot as well to really fling myself at my opponent. Will hopefully lay them out. But if not, from here, you're in a superior position to basically do whatever. You're in a superior position to then throw follow-up attacks and to continue fighting. And even if you don't drop them, there's every chance that you'll hurt them enough that they'll be like, actually fighting you was a bad idea. All right, so that's kind of common sort of defense, like common sort of attack number one, is your opponent comes at you with a big, like, with a big kind of haymaker. The next kind of common sort of self-defense thing they talk about is the grab and smack. And this is a common one today. Like, you don't even have, like, I mean, I've seen plenty of times in, like, if you ever watch like footage of fights on YouTube, which there's plenty, but realistically, of the small number of fights I've actually seen IRL, this sort of grab came up in a lot of them. Also, if you're looking for stuff that's useful for knife defense, so I get my shank, the most common form of knife attack is the grab and stab. And the best way to deal with the grab and stab is to not get grabbed. So if someone comes at me with a grab, all I do, so they'll be coming in this side, all I do is rotate my arm around. So instead of doing this, or instead of doing this, I do this and I pivot and I basically push their arm out so that their arm is now in front of them and I've got their arm as a barrier. I can then bring down, if it's a knife, bring down the other way. I usually bring down to open them up for my own counter. Making across with a nice cross. But all I do is disengage. This is less of a wide step and more of a pivot. Actually, with a step, I'm going to bring my hips forward slightly, which still gives me plenty of power, but not as much power as the pivot. And because I've grabbed their hand and brought it down, I've got more space to then throw. So someone goes to grab, I disengage, I push them out. This is a proper grab. I don't have to just shove like I would wearing a glove. Grab and strike. Grab and strike. Grab and strike. Grab and strike. And you notice that I'm not really pivoting until I've got sort of reasonable control. I am turning though, so I'm using this initial phase of my turn, like this initial turn, like this initial kind of lean that then leads into my pivot to get a bit more power and a bit more to kind of bring my structure behind my arm. So I'm mostly using structure to kind of push my opponent away. I push their arm away to then line them up for the punch. So disengage, strike. Disengage, strike. You can bounce away as well, which I like. Disengage, strike. Disengage, strike. Disengage, strike. Right. So that's kind of, one of the other things that I'm fond of. So I've got an opponent coming in, trying to grab me with their left hand and stab and hit me with their right. I disengage, I move their left hand out here, and then smack them as fast as I can. The next one, which is fairly easy to explain, this is a good kind of, this actually I find works better in a modern context. But all I do is I start just basically punching my opponent in the arm. So you notice with this, my arms do rotate between being, pretty much horizontal and coming up. They're always coming down, and I'm always keeping my the back of my bony bit here forward, because if I get punched here, it's fairly hard, and there's every chance that my opponent will be hurt as badly as I am. Whereas if I get punched here, it hurts a lot. And if you're fighting someone who's doing like a modern sense, particularly like if they've got these really turned out sort of Muay Thai type guards, you can start punching them, just throw straight punches straight into the fleshy bit. And if you've got someone, particularly if you've got someone who doesn't know how to fight, like they've just kind of got their hands up or they're flailing, just whacking them, just throwing jabs, just straight jabs, usually with a vertical fist, because, that's easy, straight into the fleshy bits of their arms will tire their arms out. And that's, it doesn't really take a lot of variance to just throw at basically below shoulder height and just go bang. And it doesn't take a lot. Like you're basically just trying to give your opponent a dead arm, which, this is kind of a very useful skill also back in the 19th century. Working class people were described as dueling with their fists. they had an issue they wanted to sort out, and there was a matter of honour because they didn't. It was very rare that they'd fence. They'd actually go out and they'd use boxing, which even the ones, because weirdly enough in Britain, working class people did practice single stick because the single stick was quite cheap. So fencing was much more egalitarian in Britain than it was on the continent. But even so, they'd still resolve duels with bare knuckle, with just like a punch on, basically. Where this gets interesting is if my opponent is doing a sensible guard, means that, even if I throw, even if they're up, I try and time their rotation, they can just move extra fast and flick me down. So if I get Sphere of Destiny again, if my opponent tries to punch me, actually, I'll do it from here where it's a bit more. My opponent tries to punch me when I'm up like here, I just make it straight down. It's not like, this technique doesn't work against a bare knuckle guard, and that's part of the reason why the guard is sway. The other reason is that a lot of bare knuckle techniques started to resemble, like bare knuckle guards resembled fencing guards, and weirdly enough, this is something that they switched to doing after boxing already appeared. Like you look at early sort of early boxing guards. You have people up here with these quite high guards, and then the guards came down and seemed more like fencing guards. The theory as to why is because the jab was inspired by a forward fencing lunge. I've got off topic, but let's say I still want to pump my opponent in the fleshy bits. All I do is flick over and come back. So I flick and come back. I'll show you the technique. Flick and back. Come over, I get to here, I rip down, and I'm basically ripping my knuckle across their fleshy bit and coming back to guard. And like this is a big motion, but it comes back to that moving the arms. It's the point where my opponent realizes that I'm doing this instead of just a normal cycle. Particularly if I start doing this sort of stuff where I'm really extending to just be like, oh, I'm a jab you, I'm a jab you, I'm a jab, bang, straight down, bang, just bang straight in, over and back. And I'm even sort of hyperextending all my muscles up here to rip them down to get extra flick as I come in. So coming in, so over, ripping down. I try to lead with this knuckle, come in and back, over 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 and back. So that's kind of a fun, just if you're doing this, if you're using, if you were using these kinds of techniques for self-defense and you've got someone who's doing it back to you, which I guess goes back to the modern thing I was saying before about, I don't know how well this would really apply in a modern situation. You've got two people doing this. This is kind of a good way to just basically start giving them a dead arm. And if you can exhaust and deaden someone's arm, they might be like, they might be like, oh shit, I can't throw, I've lost half my weapons, I might just give up. Which, I think so. I think it's a good outcome. Right. Cool. So does anyone have any questions? And does anyone have any questions about like self-defense scenarios or like scenarios that they'd like to know about how these martial arts would cover? All right. I will take that as a no. Cool. Well, that's pretty much the workshop. So, some basic boxing and yeah, some just basic boxing. It's a fairly simple system, all things considered, but it's a lot of fun. Actually, I do have one more thing to say, one more section that I want to talk about, but I'm going to pause recording just before coming back to it, so I'll be back in just a moment.